Today, I'm going to be talking about public speaking, which includes points of information, tips on how to sound confident, and more. So, what is the importance of public speaking? Well, it allows you to influence decisions and motivate change. This is really important in MUN impact because you want to be able to speak up if something doesn't seem right, or you want to speak up if something in a resolution seems unfeasible, or something else as well. Public speaking can inspire and motivate your audience, and this is what you really want when you're talking about things like opening speeches. Your call to action must inspire and motivate your audience to not only do something, but to work with you as well. It can also simply just inform a crowd, whether it be on a serious issue or a presentation you're giving to the class, which brings up a really good point because you want to be able to speak in public as well. Yes, we want you to be able to become strong speakers in MUN, and that's a little bit different from public debate. But speaking in public outside of MUN is also a really strong skill that you can foster through MUN. Good public speakers always stand out from a group and grab the attention of the audience. So remember, you always want to sound confident, which is what really grabs an audience. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So let's talk about POIs. A POI is a point of information, or when a delegate asks the speaker a question. Points of information usually occur after a speech. So this can either be the opening speech for the clause that a delegate has created. It can also be after a for speech or an against speech, which is in open debate or debate against or for. Just remember that there are three types of points of information. So there's a clarifying POI, where the delegate asks the speaker to clarify a point of their speech, or it could be a clause in that case. And you can always bring up clauses as kind of your evidence for the clarification in almost all of these points of information. A constructive point of information is where the delegate highlights something that portrays the speaker in a more positive light. So often, if you are the person who is giving the point of information, I recommend you say this. You start with the phrase, does the delegate agree? And that usually kind of hints towards a more constructive point of information, but always listen because they can use it against you as well. A destructive POI is where the delegate brings out something that worsens the image of the speaker. And so a lot of the time they will point out the fact that, let's say, are you aware that, or is the delegate aware that this clause makes the entire resolution way too expensive and therefore not feasible for LEDCs or something like that. Always remember that POIs must be in the form of a question. This is incredibly crucial because you cannot ask it in the form of a statement, or else your chair will always immediately ask you to rephrase the question. Another really important aspect of this is that you should always use the word delegate. And yeah. Okay, so there are a few ways to answer a point of information. The first one is that you can agree. So let's start with something like a constructive point of information. In a constructive point of information, you can almost always just wholeheartedly agree because they're trying to lift up your resolution, and that can be really helpful. But let's say that someone is giving you a destructive point of information. You can also agree. And I know it seems counterintuitive, but if you agree with the delegate's point and then rebut, this will make your rebuttal more significant. This is because it shows that you have an understanding, but you are clarifying something to the delegate that they might have missed in the past. And thus, your destructive point of information kind of transforms into a clarifying point of information, which is a much less intense point of information and will help you in the long run to kind of maintain the image of your resolution or clause. Want to be on the offense and make sure that you're not treating your delegate who is asking the POI as an attacker. This will make you seem much less confident if you do make them seem like an attacker. And if you make them seem like the defendant, then the committee will automatically know that you are so aware of what you are doing. The last thing that you can do is that you can admit when you might have been wrong. This is really tough, but sometimes you just have to do it. Another way you can do this, though, is to just agree. Yes, I agree that this did not work. But then you can always bring up a more positive aspect of the argument. And so that way you can counter it and again, kind of like soften the blow of the point of information in the event that you did miss something and you need to admit when you might have been wrong. So another thing that's really crucial to know in just all public speaking in general is fallacies. So if you look here, a fallacy is a mistaken belief, especially one based on an unsound argument. So an example would be the notion that a camera never lies. That's a fallacy because it's true. A camera can lie because media can be manipulated. So going back to these fallacies here, the red herring and the straw man are two very common fallacies. The red herring uses an irrelevant argument to trick the delegate when you have not actually addressed the issue at hand. And the straw man makes your opponent's argument seem weaker or portrayed in a more exaggerated light. These are both examples of fallacies, but just remember there are all types of fallacies. There's the straw man, or there's the false dichotomy, there's the bandwagon, and etc. There's so many more. And fallacies don't even have to have a name. As long as they are based on some sort of illogical argument, they're immediately a fallacy. So there are some examples here, and I will let you read them, and you can pause the video if you would like. But I'm just going to talk about the fact that when I'm talking about fallacies, we really want you just to think critically when you're up on that podium. Thinking critically means that you are not only just answering the question at hand, but if something does not make sense and the question itself is illogical, then yes, you can say something against that. And you definitely do not want that to, you don't want to respond to that. You just want to say, the delegate believes that this is a fallacy because this. And that way, your speaking skills and your public speaking and your image all become much stronger. That's really important. So let's talk about how to advocate for your opinions. There are a ton of examples here, but if you ever need a little bit more guidance, always look up these three words: logos, pathos, and ethos. They were kind of brushed upon in the opening speeches presentation of the beginner cohort, but just always remember once again, logos, ethos, and pathos. Okay? So you can use stories and examples that are relatable and relevant to your topic. And this almost always goes to the emotional appeal of the audience, as said here. And you can always look at the facts and statistics to look at it from a more statistical perspective. Another thing that you should do sometimes is to compromise. Because not all the time, almost all the time, delegates will have a different approach based on their country that they're from on how to solve the issue at hand. And some countries might not even want to solve the country's issue at hand. And so these are some things that you kind of want to battle and bounce back in between. Another thing that you always want to remember when advocating for your opinions is to remain diplomatic. Disrespecting a speaker by rolling your eyes, interrupting them, or attempting to ridicule them makes you seem much less professional and immature. And you always want to seem diplomatic or professional, and that's what's really important. So make sure you give them 100% of your respect. Listen to what other delegates are saying. This is really important because you, again, want to find fallacies, right? But another thing is that you want to try and find contradictions between a delegate's different speeches and call them out if they're saying something that goes against their policy as a country. This will make you one of the strongest speakers in the crowd because it shows that you understand not only your country's policy, the resolution's topic at hand, but also how different countries have tackled the issue at hand. And that's really important because it will show that you know their policy better than they do, and thus they become much less of a credible speaker. The last thing is how to sound confident. So there are 5 ways of how to sound confident that are listed here. But for me, the biggest one is just to have a comprehensive understanding and to not be afraid of being wrong. Because even if you are wrong, the worst that can happen is someone tells you, hey, this wasn't correct, and you can come back next time. But never think that you are wrong from the onset because it will immediately make you nervous. So the first thing is to practice, practice, practice. Wherever you can, maybe even the night before, if for something like, let's say your opening speech, you can always practice your opening speech the night before because you already have it written down. But for things like points of information, which have to be written or created, right then and there in the moment, you can still practice it by maybe mouthing it to yourself before you say it. And things like that will help you kind of slow down, which is our next point. Always slowing down while speaking will make you seem much more prepared and much more relaxed. And speaking slowly will almost always grab your attention's audience and make them really be able to listen and kind of comprehend and absorb every single word that you're saying. And it creates a more open dialogue. It creates for a much more productive dialogue if you speak a little bit slower. Maintaining good posture is also really important because your sound will immediately improve. This is kind of like a biophysical thing, but you always want to open up your diaphragm. And you can do that as long as you're not hunched. So always maintain good posture. It will help for your voice to sound much more clear. And then the last thing is to the next thing is to stay relaxed. You want to focus on what you're saying and your hand gestures. And this also helps you to speak slowly. The last thing is that you don't want to articulate a statement as a question, because posing a statement as a question makes you seem much more vulnerable and much less confident. And yeah, that is it on how to speak in public. Remember that these skills are mostly applicable to MUN at home, but they can always be applied in public as well. So if you ever see something that's a fallacy in public, maybe try to catch it out and see where it takes you.